The smoke had cleared enough to see, but what remained was almost impossible to comprehend. Where a house had stood for 37 years, only ash and twisted metal remained, grey powder settling over everything like fresh snow. The January morning was cold and still. The Santa Ana winds finally exhausted after their rage. Peter Halpin stood at what used to be the edge of his driveway in Altadena, California, staring at the ruins of the only home his children had ever known. But there, rising from the rubble like a sentinel, was something that shouldn't have been possible, a concrete statue of the Virgin Mary, her outstretched arms untouched by the flames that had consumed everything around her. Jackie Halpin hadn't wanted to come back. The very thought of seeing their home reduced to nothing felt like more than she could bear. 4 days after they evacuated, she'd held on to the photo albums Peter had grabbed in those frantic moments before they fled, the only tangible proof that their life had been real. But when their son-in-law sent the picture, when she saw Mary standing there amid the destruction, something shifted inside her chest. It wasn't grief she felt in that moment, though grief would come. It was recognition. She fell to her knees in the hotel room where they were staying, tears streaming down her face, and she knew with absolute certainty that they had to go back, not to mourn what was lost, but to give thanks for what remained. The statue was more than concrete and paint. It was a promise, standing exactly where they had placed it a year earlier, when their family had dedicated their home anew to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The Eaton fire had come without mercy on January 7th. Driven by winds that turned embers into missiles and hillsides into corridors of flame, Altadena, that quiet artistic community nestled in the San Gabriel Valley just 14 miles from downtown Los Angeles, had no time to prepare. Families woke to evacuation orders in the dark hours before dawn, scrambling to gather what they could, carry medications, documents, photographs, pets. The fire moved faster than anyone expected, jumping roads and igniting rooftops, turning the familiar landscape into something from a nightmare. Peter and Jackie had minutes to decide what to save from 37 years of marriage. 6 children, 14 grandchildren, countless dinners around a table that would soon become ash. He grabbed the albums. She grabbed her purse and the genealogy records she'd spent years compiling. They left behind furniture and clothing and every small treasure that makes a house a home. Behind them, as they drove away, the sky glowed orange and angry, and they didn't know if they'd ever be able to return. Before we continue, leave your like, share our story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. In the days that followed, they existed in a strange limbo, staying with family and watching the news like everyone else, trying to understand the scale of what had happened. 11 people dead in Altadena alone. Nearly 2,000 homes destroyed. Entire neighborhoods erased. They tried to prepare themselves for the worst. Tried to imagine their property as nothing but foundation and chimney. Tried to find gratitude in the fact that they were alive and together. But when the photo came through on Jackie's phone, grainy and smoke-hazed, but unmistakably, everything changed. There was Mary, her blue robe still visible, her face serene, her hands extended in blessing. Beside her, smaller but equally intact, stood a statue of Saint Joseph. Everything else in the frame was charcoal and ruin, but the statues stood as if the fire had simply flowed around them, as if some invisible hand had said, "This far and no farther." Peter stared at the image and felt something rise in his chest that was part laughter and part sob. His wife was crying and praying at the same time, and he realized he was too. They had to see it for themselves. The official word was clear: residents were not yet allowed back into the burn zone. Too dangerous, they said, structures still collapsing, hazardous materials, unstable ground. But the Halpins and their family decided to go anyway. To break the law, if that's what it took, because some things transcend regulations. So they gathered Peter and Jackie, their 6 grown children, some of their children's spouses, a close family friend, and they made their way back through the checkpoints and the police tape to the property on Linda Vista Avenue. What they found was devastation more complete than any of them had imagined. The house where the boys had shared one bedroom and the girls another. The house Peter had expanded with his own hands. The house that had been the center of so many birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays was gone. Not damaged, gone. The chimney stood like a tombstone. The foundation outlined where rooms used to be. And in the front yard, right where she'd always been, Mary waited. Peter would later tell reporters that everything had been fried. That was the word he used, and it captured the totality of the destruction. But the statue of the Virgin Mary and the statue of Saint Joseph were in perfect condition. Well, nearly perfect. A little singed, yes, you could see where the flames had licked at the edges, where the heat had darkened the paint, but they stood. They had stood through winds exceeding 70 miles per hour, through temperatures hot enough to melt metal and vaporize glass, through an inferno that had reduced hardwood and drywall and everything else to powder. And somehow, impossibly, they remained. The family stood in a circle around the statue, their feet crunching on ash. The smell of smoke still thick in the air, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Peter cleared his throat, and his voice, rough with emotion, began to pray. They prayed to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, as they always had. As they had taught their children to pray, as they had done in this very spot 1,000 times before, and then, because they were the Halpins and music had always been their language, they began to sing. Peter started with a simple la-la-la, finding the pitch, and then the melody of Regina Coeli rose from their throats. That ancient hymn of Easter joy sung in Latin across centuries, across continents, across every kind of sorrow. Queen of Heaven, rejoice, alleluia, they sang. And their voices were not perfect, but they were real, cracking with grief and wonder. For he whom you did merit to bear alleluia, has risen, as he said. Alleluia, they sang standing in the wreckage of their lives, and they sang with their whole hearts, and the statue watched over them with that expression that is either mercy or mystery, or perhaps both at once. Jackie's son Andrew, a composer, would later explain that this was simply what their family did in joy or sorrow, in triumph or tragedy. They sang. They had always sung. And so they sang now, not because it made sense, but because some responses to the inexplicable can only be musical. Someone was recording on a phone. Peter and Jackie hadn't planned for that, hadn't intended for this private moment of family worship to become anything public. But the video was shared, and then shared again. And within days it had gone viral, hundreds of thousands of views across Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Shared by strangers and celebrities alike. Viewed by people who had never heard of Altadena or the Halpins, but who recognized something true when they saw it. Candace Cameron Bure shared it. Betty Midler shared it. Catholics and Protestants and people of no particular faith at all watched these people singing in the ruins and felt something stir. The comments poured in, thousands of them, from around the world. I keep watching it, wrote one woman. It's so beautiful. I pray for faith like this. Another said, in the face of adversity, so much love. The response, Peter would later say, was unbelievable and so heartfelt. They had only wanted to pray as a family, to thank God for their safety and for the years they'd had in that place. They never imagined their grief and their gratitude would touch so many. The interviews came next. News crews wanting to know how they could sing at a time like this, how they could find anything to be grateful for. Peter and Jackie tried to explain, though words felt insufficient. Our home is dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and always has been. Peter said on Fox and Friends that Sunday morning, his voice steady. When you walked through our front door, the first thing you saw was a large picture of the Sacred Heart. Our entire family, my extended family, we've all dedicated our homes the same way. So when we stood there, we said a prayer to the Sacred Heart first, and then we sang to Our Lady, because that's what we've always done. Jackie added that they had been a family marked by hospitality, that their home had been a place of welcome for decades, a place where friends and strangers alike had found a seat at the table. We feel very strongly in the virtue of hospitality, she said quietly. I just wanted to pray and say, if we can do it again, that would be great. But for now, I just want to be grateful as much as I can for what we've had. They spoke about the statue as if it were self-evident what it meant, though perhaps it was only self-evident to them. Jackie described seeing the photos for the first time, how she'd fallen to her knees, how she'd known immediately that it was a sign. Not a sign that they would get their house back, they understood that was gone. Not a sign that faith would spare them from suffering, they were in the middle of suffering, but a sign that in the ashes, hope remained. Seeing that statue was a reminder that God is with us, she told reporters. Even in the ashes, there is hope. Peter nodded. The statue was concrete, yes, but it was also more than that. It was a declaration that some things cannot be burned. That faith endures when everything else fails. That Mary, the one who stood at the foot of the cross and watched her son die, knows something about remaining present in unbearable moments. The Halpins had lost genealogy records and photographs of grandparents and great-grandparents. Irreplaceable memories that Jackie would grieve. Peter had lost his work truck, his tools, his livelihood as a contractor temporarily suspended. Their daughter had lost her home too, the smaller house at the back of the property where she'd been raising her child. The losses were real and devastating and ongoing. But standing in front of that statue, they had felt something that loss could not touch. They had felt seen, held, accompanied. They had felt that their years in that house, their commitment to making it a place of prayer and welcome, had not been for nothing. The statue standing there was like a period at the end of a sentence, a way of saying, this mattered. Your life here mattered. The love you built in these rooms, the meals you shared, the prayers you prayed, all of it mattered. And none of it is truly lost, because love doesn't burn. Hope doesn't burn. Faith doesn't burn. These things are not made of wood and drywall. These things are not subject to wind and flame. And so when everything else was reduced to ash, when the physical structure of their lives collapsed, what remained was what had always been most real, their family, their faith, and a concrete statue of a woman who said yes to God even when she couldn't see the path forward, even when everything she knew was about to change forever. In the weeks that followed, the Halpins began the long process of rebuilding. A GoFundMe campaign started by their son Pete raised over $142,000, far exceeding the initial goal, as people from around the world contributed to help them start again. The family pledged to use the funds not only for their own recovery, but to help their neighbors in Altadena, to support the wider community that had suffered alongside them. Peter's concrete company, Halpin Brothers Concrete, committed to helping with site cleanup throughout the area, turning personal tragedy into an opportunity for service. Plans began to form for a new house on the same plot of land, though it would take time, months, perhaps years to bring it to fruition. Jackie said she wanted their exact little house back, though she knew that was impossible. What they could rebuild was something new that honored what had been. Andrew, their composer's son, put it simply, when we rebuild, there's going to be music there again, and there would be prayer, and hospitality, and a statue of the Virgin Mary in the front yard, because some things are worth replacing exactly as they were. The broader context of the fires made their story both more and less remarkable. They were one family among thousands who lost everything. The Eaton fire alone burned more than 14,000 acres, destroyed over 7,000 structures, and fundamentally altered the landscape of communities like Altadena and Pasadena. The death toll climbed beyond 24 across all the Los Angeles fires. The images that emerged were apocalyptic: entire neighborhoods reduced to ash, cars melted into puddles of metal, swimming pools boiled dry. Against that backdrop, one family's singing seemed almost absurd. What good were hymns in the face of such catastrophe? What difference did one statue make when so many had lost so much? But perhaps that was exactly the point. Perhaps faith is most needed, most visible, most true, when it seems most absurd. Perhaps the moments when we have every reason to despair are precisely the moments when choosing gratitude becomes most powerful. The Halpins didn't minimize their loss or pretend it didn't hurt, but they refused to let loss have the final word. They stood in the ruins and sang, and that singing was an act of defiance as much as devotion. Their story resonated because it touched something universal. You didn't have to be Catholic to understand what it meant to find something sacred standing in the midst of devastation. You didn't have to believe in miracles to feel the power of a family choosing praise over despair. The statue became, in the public imagination, a symbol of resilience, not just the physical resilience of concrete withstanding fire, but the spiritual resilience of people who refuse to be consumed by tragedy. News outlets around the world picked up the story. The National Catholic Register interviewed them at length. The tablet devoted space to exploring what the statue meant theologically, practically, emotionally. Even secular media was drawn to it, perhaps because in a moment of such widespread loss, people were hungry for hope in any form. The Halpins became, almost accidentally, ambassadors for a particular way of responding to suffering, not with bitterness or despair, but with faith that holds sorrow and joy together, that weeps and sings in the same breath. Their message to others facing loss was clear and simple. Lean on God. Give thanks for His blessings, and trust in His plan. Love, prayer, and gratitude. That's how we're going to get through this, Jackie said, and that's what we'll continue to share with others. It wasn't a complicated theology or a miraculous formula. It was the faith they'd been practicing for decades, now tested in the crucible of real loss and found to be sufficient. Peter spoke often about the Sacred Heart, about how their home had been dedicated to Christ's love for years, about how that dedication hadn't prevented the fire, but had somehow made it possible to stand in the ashes without being destroyed by them. He spoke about community and family, about the hundreds of people who'd reached out with donations and prayers and offers of help. He spoke about rebuilding, not just their house, but their lives, their sense of purpose, their commitment to hospitality. And always, they spoke about the statue Our Lady of Guadalupe. They called her, though some reports said it was simply Mary standing there in her blue robe, with her hands extended, as if she'd been waiting for them all along, as the fires were gradually contained at Eaton, fire reaching 65% containment. The larger Palisades, fire reaching 31% the work of recovery, began in earnest across Southern California. CAL FIRE reported more than 12,000 structures damaged or destroyed across approximately 63 square miles. The landscape would take years to fully heal, if it ever did. Scars would remain. Altadena would rebuild, but it would be different, marked by absence, by the memory of what once stood. In that context, the Halpin statue took on additional weight. It became a marker, not just of their family's faith, but of something larger, the idea that after fire comes rebuilding, that after destruction comes renewal, that even in the midst of ash, beauty and hope can be found. It became a place of pilgrimage, in a way, as people drove past to see for themselves the statue that had survived. Some left flowers. Some stood and prayed. Some took photos. All of them, whether they would have put it in these words or not, were looking for the same thing the Halpins had found. Evidence that something endures. The family's faith did not romanticize suffering or suggest that tragedy is somehow good because it reveals God's presence. They were clear-eyed about their loss. Peter talked about how it tears at your heart to lose sentimental items, how his wife grieved the genealogy records and old photographs that could never be replaced. They acknowledged the difficulty, the ongoing challenge of starting over in their 60s after 3 decades in one place. But they located their suffering within a larger story. A story where loss is real but not ultimate, where death is real but not final, where even burning is not the end. Their Catholic faith gave them language for this, the language of Easter, of resurrection, of life emerging from death. The hymn they sang, Regina Caeli, is traditionally sung during the Easter season, a season that begins with crucifixion and moves through grief to resurrection. That they sang it standing in the ruins of their home was not accidental. It was liturgically appropriate. It was, in its own way, a theological statement. We are people of the resurrection, and therefore we do not grieve as those without hope. This account is based on real events documented by the tablet, the National Catholic Register, Fox News, Catholic World Report, and the New York Post in January 2025. The story of Peter and Jackie Halpin's surviving Virgin Mary's statue became a symbol of hope shared across the nation and around the world. reminding countless people that faith often stands unburned amid the ashes. Their families' response, choosing to sing hymns of praise in the ruins of their home, captured something essential about the nature of hope, that it is not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of something stronger than sorrow, something that holds us even when everything else falls away.